There was a drifter who carried nothing but a bedroll and a broken season behind him, and the night he collapsed at the edge of an orc widow's farmstead was the night everything she had been pretending would change forever. There was a drifter who carried nothing but a bedroll and a broken season behind him, and she was the last person either of them expected to save the other. Rain had been falling since before dark. The kind of rain that does not announce itself, but simply arrives and stays, soaking through wool and resolve in equal measure, turning the road between the mill town of Ashfen and the outer farmsteads into a long gray apology. The drifter's name was Cale. He was 31 years old, and had been 31 for long enough that the number had stopped meaning anything cheerful. He had a lean face, a jaw that had taken a fist once or twice without complaint, and hands that knew the difference between a hammer, a plow handle, and a sword hilt, though none of those things belonged to him anymore. He was walking because the horse he'd sold in the last town had been the last thing of value he owned, and he was heading nowhere in particular, which is another way of saying he was heading toward whatever the dark placed in front of him. What the dark placed in front of him was a lamp. By the way, wherever in the world you're listening from right now, drop it in the comments. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. Okay, where were we? The lamp hung at the post of a farmstead gate, swaying in the wet wind, throwing a weak gold circle on the mud below it. Beyond the gate was a stone house, low and broad, with a roof that had been repaired in 3 different colors of thatch, which meant someone had been maintaining it alone, and with whatever came to hand. A garden ran along the south wall, dormant now, the beds covered with straw and pinned cloth against the frost. A small barn stood separate, and from it came the quiet breathing sounds of animals that had already been settled for the night. The place was not prosperous, but it was tended, and tending is its own kind of statement. Cale stood at the gate for a moment, water running from his hair into his collar. He knew better than to knock at a farmstead after dark. He knew the particular math of a lone woman on an outer holding, and what a stranger at the gate in the rain could look like. He was about to turn back toward the road when his legs, which had been walking since before dawn, simply declined to carry him any further, and he went down on one knee in the mud, with the graceless honesty of a body that has run out of arguments. The farmstead's name, painted on a plank beside the gatepost in green letters that had faded to suggestion, was Vorn's Rest. The widow's name was Mira Vorn. She was 38 years old. She was an orc, or rather, she was what Ashfen and the counties surrounding it called an orc, which meant she was broad-shouldered and gray-skinned, with the lower tusks that curved slightly upward from her jaw and the deep-set amber eyes that her people carried. She had lived in this valley long enough to know exactly what every corner of that description meant to her neighbors. When the mood was unfriendly, she had lived in Ashfen for 11 years. She had married Davin Vorn 8 months after arriving, because he had been kind, and because the farm had needed 2 pairs of hands, and because she had told herself love could grow from practical soil. It had grown. She had not expected to be right about that. Davin had been dead for 2 years and 3 months. The relic of him that she had kept was a clay pipe on the windowsill of the kitchen, never moved, still smelling faintly of the sweet cut tobacco he had favored. She did not smoke it. She did not put it away. It sat in the same spot, the light found first in the mornings, and that was enough. She saw the drifter go down from her kitchen window. She stood there for a moment, looking at the shape of him in the mud beyond her gate. She felt the familiar calculation running behind her eyes, the one every woman alone runs when the dark brings her something unexpected. Then she pulled on her waxed coat, took the kitchen lamp in one hand and the short-handled splitting axe in the other, and went out. She was not reckless. She was also not the kind of person who left someone kneeling in the rain. She came through the gate and held the lamp over him. He looked up. His face was exhausted in the specific way that is past hunger and past cold, and has arrived at something quieter and more dangerous. He did not reach for her. He did not perform distress. He simply looked at her and said, in a voice that was scraped thin from disuse, that he was sorry to be in her way. She told him he wasn't in her way. She told him the barn was dry and the animals were gentle. She told him there was a blanket on the post inside the barn door, and that she would leave the kitchen lamp on the step. She did not invite him into the house. He did not ask. And that, she would think later, was the first true thing that passed between them. He slept in the barn for 2 nights. She left a covered plate of food outside the barn door each evening without discussing it, the way she would leave water out for any creature that needed it. On the morning of the 3rd day, she came out to find the barn freshly swept, her tool wall reorganized, with a logic she immediately recognized as superior to her own, and a split cord of firewood stacked against the outside of the barn wall that she had been meaning to split herself for 3 weeks. The axe was cleaned and hung back in its place. He was sitting outside on an overturned crate, hands loose between his knees, looking at the garden beds, not sleeping. She stood there with the plate she had been carrying and made a decision. She said without warmth but without coldness either, that she had made too much porridge. He said quietly that he had noticed she made that same claim about the food she left at the barn door each night. A pause opened between them. It was not quite a smile that crossed her face. It was the precursor to a smile, the thing that lives just beneath it. She said he should come inside before the porridge went cold. He said he would wash his hands first. She said the basin was just inside the door. And they walked back to the farmhouse in the thin morning light, with 6 feet of polite distance between them, and that too was its own kind of honesty. By the ways hearts grow back into the world, they do not grow all at once. They grow the way the garden at the south wall grew, by increments invisible on any single day, by the slow accumulation of warmth and the stubborn refusal of frost to win forever. Over the following days the arrangement became, without either of them naming it, an arrangement. He worked. She worked. They were in proximity without being in each other's way. He repaired the hinge on the barn door that had been dragging since autumn. He remortared 3 stones in the south wall of the house that she had been watching for damp. She did not ask him to do these things, and she did not thank him with the kind of elaborate gratitude that makes a person feel they owe something. She thanked him plainly, the way she would thank a neighbor, and went on. He ate at her table. She cooked more than she needed to, because it was easier that way, or so she told herself. The lie was comfortable. It was the kind of lie that does no harm and permits generosity to pass between 2 people, without the weight of obligation crushing it. On the 5th day, she paid him. It was a fair day's wage for fair labor, counted out in copper coins on the kitchen table with the deliberateness of someone who understands that money offered clearly is dignity preserved. He counted it without embarrassment, set aside a portion for the meal, and she told him flatly that the meal was not a charge, and to put the coin away. He looked at her for a moment. He put the coin away. She went back to the stove. He asked, that same evening, if there was more work. She looked out the window at the farm in the low, late light, at all the 10,000 things that needed doing that she had been carrying alone for 2 years and 3 months, and she said that she supposed there was. He slept in the barn and ate at her table and worked from first light until the dark said otherwise. And the farm began to respond the way neglected things do when they receive attention. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with a quiet gathering of health, a straightening and exhale. The neighbors noticed. Neighbors in Ashfin always noticed. The outer farmsteads were too spread for constant gossip, but close enough for it to travel, and an orc widow with a human drifter working her land was the kind of thing that moved fast. Most of what it became was not kind. 2 older farmers stopped their wagon at her gate one afternoon and called out their concern, which was the word they used. She thanked them for their concern from the other side of the gate and went back to pruning the fruit trees along the east wall. Cale was on the roof of the barn at the time, replacing 2 warped shingles. He heard every word and did not come down until the wagon was gone, which was either tact or self-control or both. And she noticed it. He did not try to protect her from her neighbor's opinions. He understood that was not his place and had not been asked. What he did was work, and let the work speak in the language that farming communities respect above all others. On the 14th day, a girl came to the farmstead. She was 12 years old, thin and quick-eyed and careful in the way that children become careful when the world has taught them that trust is a resource to be allocated slowly. Her name was Pell, and she was the daughter of a charcoal burner who worked the woods at the edge of Mira's land, a man who had died the previous winter of a fever that moved too fast for the Ashfin healer to catch. Pell had been managing her father's small house since then, which is to say she had been managing alone, because the county had not gotten around to deciding what to do with a 12-year-old girl who had no close kin and a stubbornness about her that made charitable placement complicated. She came to Mira's gate because Mira was the closest neighbor who had not, at some point, looked at her the way one looks at a problem. Mira opened the gate without question. She brought the girl inside, sat her at the kitchen table, and placed in front of her a bowl of soup and a quarter loaf of bread. Cale was at the table already, oiling the straps of a worn harness. He looked at the girl. The girl looked at him with the specific assessment that children deploy. The rapid inventory that adults think children do not perform, but which is actually more accurate than most adult judgment. She decided something in that look. She picked up her spoon and ate. Pell stayed for the day and was brought home before dark. She came back the next morning, and the morning after. Within 2 weeks she was sleeping in the small upper room off the landing because the charcoal burner's house was cold, and because nobody was sleeping there anyway, and because Mira had never needed a stated reason to do a thing that was plainly necessary. A second child arrived some weeks after that. His name was Osi, and he was 6 years old, and he was Pell's cousin, discovered to exist when Pell mentioned him in the middle of supper, with the offhand certainty of someone reporting a fact that she had assumed was already known. He had been with a miller's family in the east of the county, who were not unkind, but were overwhelmed, and when Mira appeared at their door with Pell beside her and asked in a calm and unhurried voice whether Ossie would prefer to come back with them, the miller's wife had sagged with something very close to relief. Aussie was small for 6, with a round face and serious dark eyes, and a habit of asking a single enormous question, and then listening to the answer with total gravity. He asked Cale on his first day at the farm how many stones were in the south wall of the house, and Kyle said he had not counted them but that he could, and they counted them together, 263, and Aussie committed the number to memory and reported it to Pell at supper with the satisfaction of a completed mission. The house, which had held one for 2 years and 3 months, now held 4. The quiet that had been inside it, the specific quiet of preserved grief, did not vanish. It made room. This is the heart of the story, this making of room. The way a home that has been frozen opens not all at once, but stone by stone, meal by meal, evening by evening. But the windowsill also now held 3 small river stones that Aussie had brought in from his counting expeditions, and a drawing that Pell had done, of the barn in charcoal on brown paper, and a dried sprig of something from the garden that Cale had laid there without explanation one morning. Things accumulated without ceremony. That is how homes are made, by people who have been careful with themselves for a long time. Cale did not crowd the space. He understood in the wordless way that some people understand what others need, that the farm was hers, and the grief was hers, and he was there because he was useful, and because she had chosen to let him be there. He carried them lightly. He was not effortful about it. He simply was the kind of man who knew how to be present without being heavy. On an evening in the 3rd month, Mira told him. She told him the way she did most things, without preamble, without performance, looking out at the garden from her seat at the kitchen table, while the children slept upstairs, and the lamp made its small gold argument against the dark. She said that she had come to Ashfen from the Orc settlements of the Eastern Marches, where her people had been pushed by a series of treaties that were called settlements and were not, and that when she met Davin Vorn, she had been working a riverboat kitchen for wages that were half what a human worker would have received for the same job, because that was the arithmetic of her particular life, and Davin had seen her working one day, which was a thing she had not seen before in a person who had no stake in it. She said that she had been happy. She said it plainly. She said that she had been surprised every day at being happy, and then he was gone, and she had been left with the farm and the county's opinions and the 2 years and 3 months of maintaining herself, like a wall that cannot show weakness because it is holding up everything around it. Cale listened. He did not fill the pauses. He did not tell her she was strong. He did not tell her it would be all right. When she finished, he said that Davin Vorn had sounded like a good man. She said that he had been. Another silence. Then she said that she was glad Kyle had collapsed at her gate instead of a quarter-mile further down the road, where there was nothing but the ditch and the cold. He said he was glad too. That was all. But something in the room had shifted, the way the air shifts when a window is opened after a long winter. Not warm yet, but moving. The threat arrived on a Tuesday in late spring, 51 days after Cale had first gone down in the mud at her gate, and, though neither of them had named it, 37 days since the house had started feeling like a home rather than a memorial. The man who came through the gate was named Breck Solder. He had been Mira's employer at the riverboat kitchen 9 years ago before Davin, and the relationship between them had been the kind that is never put into words because the words would require accounting. He was a man of medium height and careful appearance, with the pressed clothing of someone who wants to seem prosperous, rather than someone who is. And he had with him a document which he presented over the gate in the manner of someone conferring a great courtesy. The document was a labor claim. Under Ashevin County statute, specifically a provision designed for and largely applied to Orc and Eastern March workers who had entered certain work arrangements before 870, an employer could file a claim of unpaid bond against a former worker. The provision was 30 years old, bad law from a bad decade, still on the books the way old bad laws stay when removing them requires more effort than ignoring them. Breck Solder had a copy of something Mira had signed 9 years ago, before she had been in Ashevin a full year, in a language she had been learning and had not fully understood, and a county assessor's stamp on his claim, and the particular composure of a man who knows he is doing something wrong and has dressed it in enough paper to feel protected. He said, in front of the open gate, in a carrying voice that was designed to be heard by anyone who happened to be passing, that he was simply seeking what was owed to him. That he had given Mira considerable opportunity in those early years. That the law was the law. He said the phrase "the law is the law" twice, which is always the sign of a man who is not sure it is. Mira stood at the gate. She was very still. Sale was behind her by 6 paces, close enough, not in front. Pell had come to the door of the house and was watching. Aussie stood beside Pell with his hand in hers. Mira said, in a voice that did not rise, that she would need to see the full document. Breck Solder said, of course, and produced it with the flourish of a man who expects flourish to intimidate. She handed it to Cale without looking at him. He read it. He folded it neatly and held it. She told Breck Solder that she would look into the matter and that he should come back in 4 days. He said that he had not come all this way to be told to come back in 4 days. She said she was aware of how far he had come. She said it with the particular courtesy that is not warmth, that is its own kind of wall, and he heard it, and was not sure what to do with it, and after a moment he said that he expected resolution and left. Cale unfolded the document again after the wagon was out of sight. He read it a second time, slowly. Then he said plainly that they needed to speak to Eden Grove. Eden Grove was a man of 55 who had been, for 22 years, the county's land assessor, and for the past 6, its primary reader of contested documents. He had retired from the official position, but not from the knowledge, and he had a house full of legal texts and a mind that had a gift for finding the one thread in a document that, when pulled, unraveled the whole weave. He was also, which mattered, a man who had watched the Orc labor statutes be applied selectively, for long enough to have developed a specific and well-documented opinion about it. He had been Davin Vaughan's friend for 20 years. He came to the farmstead the following morning. Eden Grove sat at Mira's kitchen table with the document and a cup of tea that he did not drink, and 3 other documents that he had brought with him in a leather satchel, and he read all of them in the specific silence of a man doing serious work. After 40 minutes he set down the last page, picked up his tea, found it cold, and set it down again. He said that the bond claim statute under which Breck Solder had filed had been amended in the 3rd year of the current land charter 8 years ago, specifically to exclude workers who had at the time of signing been operating without a recognized language interpreter present. He said that the amendment had been pushed through quietly, as a concession to the Eastern March communities, and that most people did not know it existed because most people had never needed to know it, He said that the document Mira had signed was from 9 years ago, and that she had now been 11 years in this county, and that by his reading she had been in Ashfin for less than 12 months at the time of signing, which meant the interpreter clause applied, which meant Brexolder's claim was, in the precise language of the amended statute, void at formation. He said this last phrase with the satisfaction of a man who has spent a lifetime waiting to say it about exactly this kind of document. She said after a moment that she needed this to be said in front of witnesses and not just in her kitchen. Eden said that was why he had brought the documents. He said he also intended to file a counter-assessment with the county record office, which would flag Brexolder's claim as fraudulent and recommend review of any other claims he had filed using the same statute. It was Pell who said, from the doorway where she had been listening with the careful attention of a 12-year-old, who understands that the adult world is not as orderly as it pretends, that she had seen Brexolder in Ashfin 2 days before he came to the farm. She said he had been at the assessor's office and had come out looking pleased. She said she had not known then why she was remembering it, but that she was remembering it now. Eden looked at her for a long moment with respect. He said that was useful and asked if she would be willing to say so to the county clerk. Pell said yes in the flat, unadorned way that children have when they have decided something. Ossie, from beside the stove where he had been counting the tiles on the floor, said it was 212 tiles. Nobody had asked him, but the certainty in his voice settled the room like a hand placed gently on a shoulder. The hearing was held 4 days later in the county assembly room, which was a stone building on the main road of Ashfin that smelled of tallow and old timber, and the specific damp of public buildings everywhere. But it was not empty. Eden Grove had sent word to 3 of the Eastern March families who held land in the outer county, families who had their own reasons to understand what this kind of claim meant. 2 of the farmers who had stopped at Mira's gate weeks ago with their opinions were also there, and their presence had a different quality than it had had at the gate. More uncertain, more observant. He had brought a man with him who presented himself as an advocate, a word that in Ashfin County meant someone who had read enough law to be dangerous in limited circumstances. The advocate began to lay out the terms of the bond claim with the confidence of someone who has rehearsed. He used the word entitled twice in the first minute. He noted with a specific inflection that he must have calculated that the nature of Eastern March work arrangements was often informal, and that some allowance should be made for cultural differences in contract understanding. He meant it as a diminishment. The room heard it as one. But the room also noticed it. Eden Grove presented the amended statute. He laid the original document beside it. He stated the date of Mira's arrival in the county, supported by the county's own record of entry from 11 years prior, a record that the county clerk found in the registry in 11 minutes because Eden had told him where to look. He stated the date of the signing. He read the interpreter clause aloud. He did it without drama, in the clear, flat voice of a man presenting arithmetic, which is more devastating than any dramatics, because arithmetic cannot be argued with, only accepted. Mira spoke once. She spoke near the end, when the county clerk, a careful woman named Osa Brent, who had been doing this job for 16 years, and who had a talent for knowing when a proceeding needed a human voice to land, asked if she wished to add anything. Mira stood. She said that she had come to this county with nothing, and had worked for wages that were not equal to what they should have been, and that she had signed a document she did not fully understand, in a language she was still learning, and that she had never, in the years since, been contacted about this claim until the day it arrived at her gate with a man who chose to arrive loudly and publicly, which she thought said something about what the claim was really for. She said it without her voice rising. She said it looking at no one in particular, and everyone at once. The room was very quiet after that. The particular quiet that follows truth stated plainly, which has a different texture than the quiet that follows argument. Bergsolder's advocate said something else. Bergsolder himself sat with the careful composure of a man trying to look like the proceedings were beneath him, which is always the look of a man who knows he is lost. The county clerk conferred with the two land assessors present, one of whom was Eden, and one of whom was a woman named Greel, who had been brought in from the next county, specifically because Eden had flagged the potential for conflict of interest, which is to say he had thought of everything. The claim was dismissed. The counter-assessment was entered into the county record. The advocate packed his documents with the efficiency of a man who intends to be somewhere else very quickly. Bergsolder stood, adjusted his coat, and looked for a moment at Mira across the room. She was looking at Kale. Bergsolder turned and walked out of the assembly room without looking back, and that single absence of a backward look was, the narrator notes, the most honest thing he had done all day. The Eastern March families outside offered Mira their hands as the assembly emptied. The two farmers from the gate were there, and one of them, the older one, said something to her in a low voice that Kale did not hear. Whatever it was, she nodded once, and did not reply, and the man looked as though that was more than he had expected. They walked home in the late afternoon light, the four of them, Mira and Kale and Pell, who had come to the hearing, because Eden said her observation was relevant. The road was dry and warm, and the farmsteads along it were already beginning the golden business of late spring, the fields greening, the hedgerows filling in. Aussie counted fence posts. He stopped counting at 47 when he found a stone of unusual color and required Ciel to carry it for him because his pockets were full. Kale carried it. Pell walked beside Mira and did not say anything, which was its own form of company. That evening, Mira made soup. She made more than was needed. She said nothing about having made too much, and the absence of the small lie was itself a kind of arrival. Later, when the children were asleep, they sat at the kitchen table in the lamp's circle, and Kyle set the peculiar-colored stone on the windowsill beside the clay pipe, and Mira looked at it there for a moment. The dried sprig was there. Pell's drawing was pinned to the wall above. The pipe sat where it had always sat, and beside it now something new, something that had been carried in someone else's pocket and been found to belong. Keel said after a long and comfortable quiet that he had been meaning to ask if there was more work, the same question he had asked in the first week. She recognized it. He meant it differently now, and she knew that, and he knew that she knew. And the question hung in the warm kitchen air between them, like a thing that has been true for a while and has simply been waiting for the right moment to say itself out loud. Mira looked at her hands on the table. Broad, gray, calloused, honest hands. The hands of someone who has built what she has by work and intention and stubbornness and, lately, by being willing to open a gate in the rain. She said that she supposed there was. She said it the same way she had said it the first time. But her voice had a different quality now. The way water sounds different when it is moving towards something it has chosen, rather than away from something it fears. He did not ask again. He did not need to. The small wedding was held 6 weeks later in the garden at the south wall, on a morning when the first real warmth of summer had arrived, and the beds that had been covered with straw and pinned cloth when Cale first saw them. Eden Grove was there. The Eastern March family sent 2 representatives who brought food prepared in the way of Mira's home region, which Mira had not tasted in years, and which made her stop for a moment with the wooden spoon still in her hand, in the middle of the celebration. I'm the way people are still when something returns to them that they had accepted as lost. Pell wore a dress she had made herself with fabric Mira had bought at the Ashfen market, green as the farmstead sign, cut with a severity that suited her character perfectly. She stood beside Mira during the simple words spoken by Eden Grove, who had acquired over decades of reading documents the authority to make things official through the county's civil compact. She stood very straight, which was Pell's way of saying something important, without saying it. Aussie stood beside Cale and held 263 fence-post-shaped thoughts in his head, and said nothing, and then, when the moment came, said very quietly and very seriously, as though completing a count he had been running for months, good. There was, in that single word, more ceremony than most weddings achieve. Mira sang at the end of the afternoon when the food was done and the light was going amber in the way of early summer evenings, when the day holds the warmth a little longer than it should, as if reluctant to let go. She sang something from the Eastern Marches, something in the language of her people that she had not sung since Davin died, because singing alone is a particular kind of lonely that is hard to explain. She sang it not loudly and not with performance, just with the steadiness of a voice that has remembered how to be used. Cale listened. Pell listened. Aussie, who had fallen asleep against the south wall in the last of the warmth, slept through it, which was perfect, because sleeping children are what peace looks like when it takes a shape you can see. The clay pipe sat on the windowsill inside. The stone Aussie had found sat beside it. There was room. There had always been room. And she had simply, finally, let herself know it. A broken heart does not need forgetting in order to heal. It needs only enough room for what comes after to put down roots beside what came before, and to grow there slowly, the way all true things grow, without fanfare, without permission from anyone,